Welcome to the Horror Story Channel, where nightmares come to life. Join us for spine-chilling tales of terror, creepy urban legends, and haunted places. If you're brave enough to face your deepest fears, hit the subscribe button and follow us on social media for our latest horror stories. Without any delay, let's jump right into the story. The Abandoned Asylum. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she gazed up at the looming, decaying asylum. Its walls were covered in vines, and the windows were boarded up, giving the impression that the building had been abandoned for years. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves, and turned to face her team. "All right, everyone, let's get to work," she said, her voice betraying a hint of uncertainty. As they made their way inside, the team's footsteps echoed through the empty halls. The air was thick with the smell of mold and decay, and the sound of their breathing seemed unnaturally loud in the stillness. Despite the eerie atmosphere, Sarah tried to maintain a sense of professionalism. She assigned her team tasks to explore the different areas of the asylum, mapping out their investigation. As they went their separate ways, Sarah's anxiety began to grow. She knew that they were here to investigate reports of paranormal activity, but she tried to reassure herself that it was just an abandoned building, that there was nothing to be afraid of. But as she turned a corner, she caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of her eye. Her heart skipped a beat, and she whipped around to face the empty hallway. There was nothing there, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching them. As the team explored the asylum, strange occurrences began to happen more frequently. Doors would slam shut on their own, and they would catch glimpses of ghostly apparitions out of the corners of their eyes. Sarah tried to dismiss these events as just their imaginations, but her unease grew with each passing moment. The more she saw, the more convinced she became that there was something sinister lurking in the shadows. As they reached the main hall, Sarah's anxiety reached a breaking point. She felt a sudden chill, as if someone was breathing down her neck. She turned around and gasped. In the darkness, she saw a figure, a ghostly apparition standing before her. She couldn't see its face, but she could feel its presence, malevolent and threatening. Sarah stumbled backwards, her heart racing. The figure vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Sarah and her team alone in the darkness. Despite her growing unease, Sarah pressed on, determined to uncover the secrets of the asylum. But as the night wore on, the terror of the unknown began to take its toll on her and her team. Chapter 2: Uncovering the Past. Sarah and her team had come to the abandoned asylum with the intent of uncovering the truth. But as they dug deeper into the asylum's history, they realized that the truth was far more disturbing than they could have ever imagined. The team had split up to explore different areas of the asylum. Sarah had decided to investigate the administrative office, hoping to find records that might shed light on the asylum's past. As she sifted through the piles of dusty files, she couldn't help but feel an unsettling presence in the room. The silence of the asylum was oppressive, broken only by the sound of her own breathing and the rustling of papers. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew through the office, sending papers flying and causing Sarah to jump. She looked around, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Still, the feeling of being watched persisted. As she continued to search through the files, she came across a folder labeled Dr. Samuel. Inside, she found notes detailing his treatments of patients, which included torture and other inhumane methods. Sarah's stomach turned as she read the notes, struggling to reconcile the horrors with the man she had once respected. But it was the final note that made Sarah's blood run cold. It was a record of an experiment that had been conducted on a patient. The experiment had gone horribly wrong, resulting in the patient's death. And Dr. Samuel had covered it up. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of dread as she realized the full extent of Dr. Samuel's crimes. She knew that she needed to share the information with her team, but the thought of confronting Dr. Samuel himself filled her with unease. As she left the office, Sarah couldn't help but feel like she was being followed. She quickened her pace, trying to put some distance between herself and whatever was lurking in the shadows. But it was too late. As she turned a corner, she found herself face to face with a ghostly apparition. It was the patient from Dr. Samuel's experiment, twisted and tortured beyond recognition. Sarah froze, unable to move as the apparition lunged towards her. But then, with a sudden burst of courage, she remembered the purpose of her investigation. She was there to uncover the truth and put an end to the horrors of the past. With a deep breath, Sarah stood her ground and faced the apparition head-on. It dissipated into thin air, leaving Sarah shaken but emboldened. She knew that the path ahead would be difficult and terrifying, but she was determined to see it through to the end. Sarah and her team cautiously made their way through the darkened halls of the asylum. They could feel the tension building within them, each step bringing them closer to the source of the strange occurrences they had been experiencing. As they turned a corner, they came face to face with a figure in a white lab coat, standing ominously in the middle of the hallway. "Who are you?" Sarah asked, trying to sound confident despite the fear that was creeping up within her. The figure slowly turned to face them, revealing a face twisted with anger and madness. "I am Dr. Samuel," he said in a cold, menacing tone. "And you are trespassing on my property." Sarah and her team tried to back away, but found their path blocked by ghostly apparitions that seemed to have materialized out of nowhere. Panic set in as they realized they were trapped, with no escape in sight. Dr. Samuel began to move towards them, his eyes wild with fury. "You have no idea what I've been through," he growled. "The things they did to me, to the patients here. I won't let anyone else suffer like I did." Sarah tried to reason with him, to explain that they were there to help, but her words fell on deaf ears. Dr. Samuel was beyond reason, consumed by his desire for revenge. As he lunged towards them, Sarah and her team sprang into action. They used their knowledge of the asylum and their own ingenuity to outsmart the crazed doctor. They dodged his attacks, ducking and weaving as he swung a rusty scalpel at them. Sarah spotted an opportunity and quickly grabbed a nearby fire extinguisher. With all her strength, she slammed it into Dr. Samuel's side, knocking him to the ground. As Dr. Samuel struggled to get back up, Sarah and her team scrambled to their feet, ready to fight. They knew that this was their chance to defeat the crazed doctor and put an end to his reign of terror. With the fire extinguisher still in her hand, Sarah charged at Dr. Samuel, who was now on his knees. She swung the heavy metal canister with all her might, hitting Dr. Samuel on the back of his head. He fell to the ground, dazed and disoriented. As the team moved in to apprehend him, Dr. Samuel suddenly regained his composure and lunged at Sarah, grabbing her by the neck. She struggled to break free, but his grip was too strong. In a moment of desperation, Sarah kicked Dr. Samuel in the groin, causing him to release his grip. She gasped for air as she stumbled away, but she knew that she couldn't let her guard down. Dr. Samuel was still a formidable opponent, and he was now even more enraged. Suddenly, Dr. Samuel pulled out a scalpel, brandishing it in the air as he charged towards Sarah. She ducked just in time, narrowly avoiding a deadly strike to her neck. With adrenaline coursing through her veins, Sarah spotted an opportunity and lunged at Dr. Samuel, using the fire extinguisher to deflect his attack. She swung the canister with all her strength, hitting Dr. Samuel squarely in the face. He fell to the ground, unconscious. Breathless and trembling, Sarah and her team looked around, taking stock of their surroundings. The room was littered with broken furniture and debris, a testament to the intensity of the battle. They knew that they had won, but the cost had been high. As they made their way out of the asylum, Sarah and her team were silent, lost in their own thoughts. They had faced unimaginable horrors and survived, but at what cost? The memories of their encounter with Dr. Samuel would haunt them for the rest of their lives, a constant reminder of the dangers that lurked in the shadows. But as they emerged from the dark, foreboding building, they also felt a sense of triumph. They had faced their fears and emerged victorious, proving that they were stronger than the forces of darkness. Sarah tried to return to her normal life after the investigation of the asylum, but the memories of what happened continued to haunt her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the twisted face of Dr. Samuel and the other ghostly apparitions that haunted the asylum. She was plagued by anxiety and panic attacks, making it difficult for her to focus on anything else. As time passed, Sarah realized that she couldn't keep running away from her fears. She knew that the only way to move forward was to confront them head-on. She began to research trauma and anxiety, learning coping mechanisms and techniques to help her manage her symptoms. She also started to reach out to others who had experienced similar traumas, offering them support and a listening ear. Despite the progress she was making, Sarah still couldn't bring herself to visit the asylum again. It remained a symbol of the horrors she had witnessed and the lives that had been destroyed within its walls. She tried to push it out of her mind, but it was always there, lurking in the back of her thoughts. One day, Sarah received a letter from a former patient of the asylum. The patient had read about Sarah's investigation and wanted to share their own experiences. Sarah was hesitant to read it, fearing that it would bring back painful memories. But she knew that she couldn't keep running away forever. As she read the letter, Sarah was struck by the similarities between the patient's experiences and her own. She realized that they weren't alone in their trauma, and that there were others who had suffered at the hands of Dr. Samuel and the asylum. The patient's words brought her a sense of closure and understanding, and she felt a weight lifted from her shoulders. In the weeks that followed, Sarah started to see a change in herself. She was still haunted by the memories of the asylum, but she no longer felt powerless against them. She had found a way to take control of her anxiety and fear, and to use her experiences to help others. She knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to face it head-on. As she looked back on her investigation of the asylum, Sarah realized that it had taught her an important lesson. Sometimes, the only way to conquer your fears is to face them head-on. And though it may be a difficult journey, it is one that is worth taking. Sarah knew that she still had a long way to go, but she was ready to take the first step. Sarah's newfound strength and resilience led her back to the asylum. This time, she was determined to put an end to the horror that had plagued the lives of so many people. She teamed up with a group of investigators, each with their own specialties, to uncover the secrets of the asylum once and for all. Together, they worked tirelessly, combing through old records and interviewing former staff and patients. They uncovered evidence of abuse, neglect, and experimentation that had taken place within the asylum's walls. They even found evidence that Dr. Samuel had continued his unethical experiments long after the asylum had officially closed its doors. The investigators took their findings to the authorities, who launched a full-scale investigation into the asylum and its staff. The authorities were shocked by what they found, and many of the staff were brought to trial for their crimes. Dr. Samuel, however, was never found. It was as if he had disappeared into thin air. Despite the lack of closure, Sarah felt a sense of relief and satisfaction knowing that the truth about the asylum had finally been uncovered. She knew that many of the patients and staff members who had suffered within its walls would never be able to fully heal, but she hoped that the investigation would provide some measure of justice for them. In the years that followed, Sarah continued to use her experiences to help others who had suffered from trauma and abuse. She became an advocate for mental health awareness and an outspoken critic of institutions that failed to protect the vulnerable. Though the memories of the asylum still haunted her, she knew that she had found her purpose in life, to help others find healing and closure, just as she had. Years later, Sarah received a mysterious package in the mail. It contained a letter and a small box. The letter was written by Dr. Samuel himself, confessing to his crimes and expressing remorse for the pain he had caused. The box contained a key to the asylum and a note that simply read, "It's time to face your fears once and for all." Despite her initial hesitation, Sarah knew that she had to face the asylum one last time. She gathered a group of trusted friends and returned to the asylum, where she used the key to unlock a secret room that had never been discovered before. Inside, she found evidence of Dr. Samuel's most horrific experiments, as well as a diary that detailed his descent into madness. Reading the diary was difficult, but it provided Sarah with the closure she had been seeking. She understood Dr. Samuel's motives, even if she could never forgive his actions. As she left the asylum for the final time, Sarah felt a sense of peace that she had never felt before. She knew that the horrors of the asylum would always be a part of her, but they no longer held power over her.